It's been 5 weeks since Joe Biden swore in as the 46th President of the United States, declaring to the world that America is back. As Washington moves to re-engage with its allies and recommit to the spirit of multilateralism, governments around the world have been recalculating their diplomatic strategies in anticipation of Biden's foreign policy. And among them, South Korea, as a key ally of the United States, has been hoping for greater engagement and better relations after 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency tested the strength of their partnership. As the two countries face common challenges from climate change to nuclear threats from North Korea, how can they best cooperate to move forward stronger and firmer in their alliance? For this, we turn to Mark Takola, Vice President of Korea Economic Institute of America, who is a veteran diplomat of 38 years in service. His last posting was as Minister Counselor for Political Affairs at the American Embassy in London, and before that he served as Deputy Chief of Mission at the American embassies in South Korea, Mongolia and Iceland. Mr. Takola received the State Department's Superior Honor Award for his role in implementing the Dayton Peace Accords during his time as political counselor in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's a great pleasure and an absolute honor to have you on our show, Mr. Takola. Welcome, and how are you today, sir?
Fine, thank you. It's actually a little bit warmed up in Washington, so it's not as freezing as it was last week.
Well, that's great. It's been a bit cold in Korea. Temperatures actually dropped, but hopefully things will warm up soon. But, well, again, thank you for joining us. And, well, we've been waiting to have this interview with you because we really wanted to hear about your thoughts on how this bilateral relationship is going to move forward. And especially because during the Obama administration, you were here in Seoul at the American Embassy as Deputy Chief of Mission. After he retired from diplomatic service, though, Seoul-Washington ties, they took a rather frosty turn over trade and shared defense costs under the Trump government. And these sticking points, they do remain today. So we're wondering, will relations warm up between Seoul and Washington's new foreign policy handlers under the Biden government?
The Trump administration was an unusual time because the two issues that Donald Trump always cared about for decades were merchandise trade balances and the cost of defense sharing. And those are two issues that he became very engaged with South Korea. So the agenda under Trump was focused on those two things, the trade and the defense sharing costs. Now, under the Biden administration, I think we're in for real change. I think we'll still have issues to deal with in the trade front because there are always some trade disputes between countries that have a lot of trade. And the cost sharing has always been an issue, and it's always been resolved after negotiations. So I think those two issues still need to be worked on, but the focus will shift. And I think those two things will be dealt with normally and traditionally. The Biden administration has already signaled it's very focused on multilateral engagements and restoring relations with allies. So I think the dialogue between Washington and Seoul is going to become much more of a dialogue about our cooperation on third countries, such as North Korea and China and Japan and the trade mechanisms. So there'll be a lot of discussion about how we can work together in those forums and with those countries.
Well, the Obama administration, it was trying to make a pivot to Asia, but then it was criticized for being rather passive towards the Asia Pacific, and it was also criticized for enabling the rise of China. How seriously do you think that the Biden administration will take with its ideological and economic rivalry with Beijing? And what would that mean for American allies like South Korea and countries in the European Union, which are strongly aligned with the US in terms of security, but they also heavily depend on trade with China?
Well, with the Obama administration and before, the U.S. has never been opposed to the rise of China. I mean, China becoming more successful and prosperous is good for everybody. It's good for the Chinese people. It's good for the world economy. So the issue is never whether China would rise or not. The issue is whether or not they would act as a responsible international player. And so those issues existed under the Obama administration and Trump administration, and they will continue to exist. But now I think they've taken center stage. So I think the U.S.-China foreign policy issues are probably the most important U.S. foreign policy challenge. And again, the issue is not whether or not China's going to rise. The issue is China's own behavior in areas such as its radical maritime boundary claims, its industrial espionage, its attempts to censor criticism of China in other countries. and its use of economic and commercial tools to punish countries with which it has policy disagreements, such as South Korea over the THAAD or now with Australia. So it's China's behavior we need to work on.
And of course, what makes countries like South Korea and those in the European Union rather reluctant to move away from China is the trade links that they share with Beijing. And Mr. Biden's Made in All of America agenda, it's been raising some concern that the world's largest economy, America, won't be shifting away from Donald Trump's protectionist policies or striking up significant new trade deals. Do you think America is going to increase incentives for allied countries to, well, encourage them to turn away from China or offer an alternative market that they could find new opportunities in?
I think it's more complicated than that. I think all countries need to trade with China when it's in their mutual benefit to do so, and need to be a little bit careful about China's use of economic leverage against countries. So we're all going to trade with China. The issue is kind of under what rules we do that and how much we cooperate among ourselves in trying to nudge China in the right direction.
And do you see any possibilities for stronger economic cooperation between South Korea and the United States?
Oh, I do. I think we're natural allies in all of the technologies that matter going forward. Green technologies, biopharmaceuticals, advanced electronics, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles. Those are all areas where South Korea has real strengths, and the U.S. does too. And I think it's very much in our interest to cooperate in those areas where we're both strong.
And of course, all countries are trying to make advancements in new technologies like 5G, artificial intelligence, and these all fit in the frame of global governance as well, as these are all tied to security interests as well. And the Biden administration has pledged to bring America back to the head of the table of global governance, dealing with challenges in health, security, climate, and setting technological standards. And South Korea is going to be attending the G7 meeting in Cornwall this summer, along with other countries, Australia and India. And this is, in a way, expected to shape up to become a more permanent group of democratic nations called the D10. How do you think South Korea can now become a key player of global governance, sort of graduating from its status of a follower?
Well, I think these organizations, such as the G7, are going to become more flexible in who's involved in what conversations. So we're not going to have the former very rigid institutionalized structures. NATO is an example of one that has a strong institutional basis. I mean, future coalitions of countries to work on issues will be more flexible. But Korea certainly belongs at the table, and they're exactly right to be in Cornwall. That's a good invitation. Korea has some real strengths, especially in global health. You're proven to be a leader in dealing with a pandemic, and I think going forward, South Korea can be a global leader on public health issues. Not just pandemics, but beyond that. And also in green technologies and the advanced technologies you mentioned, South Korea can be a real leader in those areas too. And I would also not discount Korea's ability to be a global leader in values areas, such as democracy, rule of law, human rights. I think those are areas where South Korea has real strengths and can take some strong positions.
Well, South Korea is clearly interested in joining the table of global governance, but, well, its neighbor Japan, that showed some displeasure towards South Korea's joining of the G7 meeting when Seoul was initially invited last year, and is expected to a certain extent that their rocky relations might become a factor if Seoul joins the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership as well. Do you see Seoul-Tokyo ties improving under the Biden administration?
As I mentioned earlier, the Biden administration is very interested in multilateral cooperation. And so clearly it's strong in the U.S. interest that there be good trilateral cooperation among the United States, South Korea, and Japan. So I think the Biden administration's role will be to point out the benefits of trilateral cooperation. But in terms of Japanese-South Korean relations, that's for the two countries to work out. And I'm sure they can. I think there are signs of improvements now. I think that's the two countries know each other well. The U.S. role is not to try to push them together. The U.S. role is to try to describe to the other two governments what we can do as a trilateral group together.
And now on North Korea, of course, a key agenda for Seoul and Washington. there's been no communication between Washington and Pyongyang since President Biden took office, and for quite a while since the Hanoi talks broke down. But the State Department recently did say, though, that North Korea is an urgent priority for the US, but it's still uncertain how the administration is going to approach Pyongyang and go about its North Korea policy. And North Korea has also been relatively silent over the last few months. So as these two sides appear to be sort of sizing each other up, what do you think is the best way to move forward constructively into dialogue? And what are some previous missteps that you hope to see the Biden administration and the Kim Jong-un regime avoid?
Well, in Washington, I think the policy review is underway. I think the Biden administration is looking at next steps on North Korea. But the good news is there are a lot of people in the Biden administration who know North Korea really well. They've negotiated in the past. They've been very connected with it. So the policy review might not take that long. I think the Biden administration is likely to look towards ways forward to be constructive and positive. I think a lot depends on when North Korea will be prepared to engage. But I don't think we need to waste time. I think in the meantime, Washington and Seoul should have a robust conversation about things we can do together, such as coming up with a joint plan on how we might be able to help the North Korean economy, which is clearly in deep, deep trouble, in ways that Kim Jong-un would find acceptable. So there are areas where we could be constructive. I think one area might be to change the discussion a bit. So rather than about strictly denuclearization, we might talk about other issues. For example, North Korean membership in the IMF or World Bank or WTO, we might help with that in exchange for North Korea being more transparent in its budgeting and cutting down its cyber criminality. Or we could talk about conventional arms controls. We could talk about other things. Second, we could invite more partners in, maybe the European Union, maybe other countries could help join the conversation beyond just denuclearization. And the third idea that I'm kind of drawn to is for the US and South Korea to make a joint public offer to North Korea. Maybe we should get together and come up with a package to propose publicly for North Korea to react to, so we could take the initiative rather than waiting for North Korea to step first.
So you're saying that there could be a more comprehensive way of approaching North Korea rather than just pinning down on denuclearization itself.
Yeah, different ways. We've been a bit stuck. I mean, we're kind of a stalemate now. The Hanoi summit was the end of the dialogue. We need to find some way forward. And I'm not sure that sanctions relief for denuclearization is enough of a negotiating framework to really succeed. We might need to do more than that.
But when talks do come down to denuclearization, though, do you think, well, the dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear program, so denuclearization, do you think it has any hope, or do you think a step-by-step disarmament is really the best we can hope for?
I don't think it's a choice. I think we do both. I think we need to hold out the eventual goal of denuclearization. After all, that's North Korea's policy too. They say they want to be denuclearized in the future when conditions warrant. So we should all agree that North Korea is not going to be a permanent nuclear power. At the end of the road, it will be without nuclear weapons. But along the way, we can do nuclear risk reduction, we can do arms controls, we can make it a process rather than trying to reach the end goal immediately.
Well, I suppose, as you said, Biden's North Korea policy is still under review, so we'll have to wait and see how that comes out. But this is where we'll leave the discussion today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark Takola, Vice President of the Korea Economic Institute of America. Again, it's been an incredible honor to have you on our show. Thank you so much for joining us from Washington.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.